I know before you have said that you agree um, that if parents can afford education for their kids, they should still have access to education. But what you believe is you think that the government should just give them the money it would cost for them to basically get like pay for an education, right? That's what you've said before.
Yeah, I believe that the government shouldn't be messing with the demand and supply of the markets. I'm not saying the government should stay out of things. I think that when governments suck at supplying goods and services, but I also acknowledge, as a free market capitalist, I do acknowledge that the markets have their weaknesses. One of the main weaknesses of the market is that it's blind to negative and positive externalities. So, if you read Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which is the foundation of modern capitalism as we know it, it acknowledges the need for government involvement, especially when it comes to adjustment for positive externalities. So, just this is complicated talk by saying that yes, the government does need to play a role, and when there's a service or a good that provides benefit to the society as a whole, not just the people involved in the trade, then the market is not going to be efficient when it comes to determining how much that good needs to be supplied. So, if something like education benefits the whole society, not just the people who are providing the education and the people who are receiving the education. So it makes sense for the government to come and provide subsidies, not to supply education, because if the government supplies education, it will suck at it. It will hurt the private sector. It will reduce competition, and it will provide services that are not needed. It's not going to be based on what's most profitable and what's the most in demand. It will also be open the door to government brainwashing and stuff like that, right? So instead of doing that, just provide people with subsidies to go spend on education, and that way you're actually improving, increasing the size of the private market, and you're increasing competition because now more people have more money to spend on education. And not only you're increasing education because there's more dollars chasing educational services, you're going to reduce costs, because if you supply education, you increase the cost because government agencies prefer to get bigger and bigger and bigger to justify their costs. But if you actually give people money to spend on education, you bring the prices lower and lower and lower. Why? Because, I mean, it will bring it higher because now more dollars are chasing the education, but that's an increase in price that is justified because people want the education. But it will give you the lowest prices because you have more private suppliers of education having to compete for those dollars. And because they have to compete for those dollars, they compete in quality, but also in price. And that's the best way to bring the prices lower. All right. So, what's your
Well,
question?
okay, so my fear with that is um, right now, like 87% of school age children are in public education in America. My fear is that if we go from like 87% in public education to, let's say, only like 15% of kids are going to school via their parents were given money to pay for their schooling, I'm scared that at that point, what would happen is like schools would open up that basically are being made very cheaply, and that the kids who and like we would have a situation where the money being given to families to enroll their kids in school would be just enough money for them to go in the cheapest possible school and the cheapest possible schooling option, because only 15% of kids are utilizing it, is going to therefore be much worse than the public school system now, where 87% of kids utilize it, because we would have less interest at that point in having the cheapest possible option be a quality option if only 15% of people are using it as opposed to 87% of people.
I mean, if the public schools are not giving you the skills that will make you more likely to employed, and then now you have more dollars in the private sector and the government is helping with more demand in the private sectors, then these private sector educational services will be motivated not to just give you something cheap and useless, because if it's cheap and useless, then why would you even waste your time going there, right? If they're competing for to convince you to spend your money on them, then they would have to provide you with a service that makes you wanting to buy it. If it's a shitty product, like why? Because remember, you're not just giving them the money that government give you to spend on them. You're also spending your time on them, time that you could have been working. So if they're giving you something that is not useful at all, then you wouldn't even waste your time on it. So this is the good thing about the private sector. When you provide a service, it needs to be actually something you want, or else you're not going to go with it. You're not going to do it. You're not going to buy it.
But like, that's the thing. What if there's only horrible, like, there's just horrible options that no one would use if they could afford better?
So my wife happens to be an education researcher, policy advocate, specifically advocating for this very policy. So here's the thing. The amount of money spent student, at least in Israel, but I assume it's the same in the United States, by the taxpayer is insane. And the claim isn't, oh, let's save taxpayer money by lowering the price, but instead it's, let's take the same amount of money per student, literally give it to the student, meaning give it to the parents to choose. It's called a voucher system, where to what school they're going to send their kids, and the schools get a funding based on the number of students they have. And that causes so it's not that not enough money would be allowed per student. It's just going to allow, because it's directly given to the schools, it allows schools to have way more of a budget for both teacher salaries and for amenities than what you can have in the current system, which is highly dysfunctional and inefficient. And what this allows is, first of all, if there are bad schools, no one's going to go to them. Second of all, you're not locked in based on your postal code. Like, you're not locked in just, I was born in a bad neighborhood that has very low funding by the government, and therefore the public school in that neighborhood also has very low funding. And so I'm going to have a shitty school, and I'm going to perpetuate my family's economic problems. So this actually allows for better social mobility, because if there's a good school in a reasonable distance from you, then you can go to it. And because every student is worth so much money to the schools will make it's worthwhile to collect kids, like have busing from relatively remote locations, just because again, I can't stress enough how insane the amount of spending per student is. It's just that because it's so inefficient, it never gets to the actual quality of the education. And by the way, it's not necessarily, you don't even have to close any schools. You can use all the same schools. It's all like the public system and private system would be essentially the same. It's just that the public schools will be like, every school would get differentiated funding based on the number of students that choose to go to it. And so you can still have the public schools. If they're good schools, if people want to go to them, they will continue going to them. And the schools just have way more of a budget, because there will be way less intermediaries collecting paychecks and rent seeking between the student and the quality of their education. Also between the teacher and their salary, by the way. The teacher salaries will be able to be much higher if you can do that. And you can just have a state subsidized service that is made to be as efficient as possible, as opposed to pay as many salaries as possible to people who don't really do much. And if you want an example of this kind of system at work, you can look at Israel's health system, which is by and large considered one of the best in the world, which operates based on this very principle of vouchers. So each citizen in Israel is like, there are 4 co-ops vying for each person, and they get funded based on the number of people who choose them. And so they act like private companies, but healthcare in Israel is relatively cheap, and it's not as good as private healthcare in the States, but for what you're paying, it's insanely effective. And this kind of system for education can work just as well, if not probably more so, because like the number of intermediaries you have to go through between the decision or the funding and the person who's supposed to be benefiting from that funding.